Hi, everyone. Welcome to our lovely session today. I'm just going to kick us off. I'm Kristen Rexing. I'm the Executive Director of SAVIR, the Society for Advancement of Violence and Injury Research. And today's program is part of a larger fall forum that we've been hosting for the past 5 days. Maybe some of you have joined us, and if not, welcome to our new colleagues. If you're not familiar with SAVIR, we are a professional organization dedicated to fostering excellence in the science of preventing injury and violence. And we love to connect our members and network and share new skills and do some skill building, which is what today's forum is about. We have a ton of resources available on our website. We encourage you to go visit them. And if you are not a member and are interested in becoming a member, please feel free to check out our website and all that our membership has to offer. And we have our upcoming conference in April. We welcome you to join us. Abstracts are currently open, but you're not here for all of that. Today, you're here to learn about roadway safety, and I'm going to pass it over to our amazing colleagues over at Parachute.
Thank you, Kristen, and welcome everyone. I am Val Smith, and I'm the Director of Programs at Parachute Canada. Parachute is Canada's national charity dedicated to injury prevention. I'm delighted to be here with you today for our webinar, From Pavement to Policy, Designing Streets for Safety, Equity, and Engagement. This event, as Kristen has said, is co-hosted by SAVIR and supported by our partners at Desjardins Insurance in Canada. Together, we're bringing forward a really important discussion, and it's one that really connects research, practice, as well as advocacy to create safer streets for everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment for a land acknowledgement. Parachute is located on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, this land is still home to many Indigenous people, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work here. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I invite each of you to reflect on the lands you are joining. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral land and unceded territory of all the Inuit, First Nations, and Métis people who call this land home. Thank you. So over the next 90 minutes, we're going to be exploring pedestrian safety from many angles, from the behaviors and risk we need to understand to the role of engineering and street design, and to how communities can be meaningfully engaged. We're also going to be bringing in some policy, and we've got some great speakers from each of those sectors who are going to help make some connections between those platforms. So I'm very pleased to be co-moderating today's conversation with Dr. Elizabeth O'Neill. Elizabeth is the assistant professor in the Department of Community and Behavioral Health at the University of Iowa, as well as a SAVIR Board Director. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Val. I just have to say today we're joined by a really fantastic group of panelists who bring diverse expertise and perspectives to our topic today. The order of presentations will be first Jesse Singer, journalist, author, advocate, and senior strategist and head writer at Transportation Alternatives. Dr. Laraz Ferdman will be our second speaker. She's the road safety supervisor at the City of Guelph in Canada. That will be followed by Gregory Francese, the transportation planner at the City of Hoboken. And then we'll round things out finally with Cassie Smith, strategic lead of transportation at the Enviro Center, also in Canada. Thank you to each of our panelists. Oh, so actually we'll just get started. We'll take it away with Jesse.
Morning, everyone. Oh, good afternoon.
Oh, actually, I'm so sorry, Jesse. I'm sorry. I had one more thing to add there. I'm sorry. Thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your time today. Before we begin, just a quick reminder, the session is being recorded and we will have time for questions at the end. Please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen throughout the discussion. So now, please, Jesse, take it away.
Let me share my screen. Can everyone see that?
No, I can't see anything yet, Jesse.
Oh, let's try it again.
It looks like it's starting to share now. And you're not in presentation mode yet, so you might want to just swap it over to presentate. There we go. Good to go.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to be brief today because this is a fantastic group of people and I want to get us all talking and not so much talking about me. And I'm going to focus less on what I do and instead on the big ideas behind my work. So I'm a journalist and author of a book called There Are No Accidents, The Deadly Rise of Injury and Disaster, Who Profits and Who Pays the Price. And I am senior strategist at Transportation Alternatives. The book chronicles the history of the word accident and the historic and current rise in so-called accidental deaths in the US, and that includes huge rises in traffic fatalities, especially pedestrian and cyclist fatalities, which are rising at a really unprecedented rate right now. So that's one of the hats I'm going to wear today. The other one is at Transportation Alternatives, where I work on communications and campaign strategy to change policy in New York City to make streets safer for everyone, but especially the most vulnerable road users, children, seniors, people walking, people on bikes. And the way those two things connect is with a fundamental idea of why our roads aren't safer, why our world isn't safer. This thing that we inherently get wrong, which is when we see something unsafe, we say, who made a mistake? Who made an error? What's wrong here? We are hyper focused on error in cases of injury and ignore the systemic conditions that cause harm. We spend a lot of time worrying about what went wrong and not a lot of time worrying about how to reduce the harm when things inevitably go wrong. So a lot of what I'm going to offer today is connecting that big idea of how we can change how we talk about safety to make ourselves more effective and how we can do it through policy. And this is a great little quote that kind of gets at an example of that. Dr. William Hayden was the first administrator of NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, here in the US. Now, that's the organization that regulates cars and says, okay, cars have to have seatbelts, cars have to have airbags, cars have to have anti-lock brakes. And he gets at an idea that we've kind of lost, which is that we spend a lot of time saying you should not drive so fast. And then we make it totally legal to build cars that can drive faster than it's legal to drive anywhere. And underpinning all of that is this other quote by Ralph Nader, who helped usher in a lot of those regulatory policy changes in the 50s. Now, they were all focused on people inside cars, and we can talk about that more later, but there's also an inherent idea there, which is that mistakes shouldn't be deadly, that a moment's carelessness shouldn't be a death sentence, and it shouldn't be a way that you're allowed to kill someone either. But putting forth those ideas involves focusing more on the systems that we all interact with, and a little less on the mistakes and the carelessness and the errors and even the bad decisions like driving drunk or choosing to speed. So just to like apply that practically and to look at some streets in New York City, here's a street where a moment's carelessness, a single mistake, a single bad decision is a death sentence, whether you're in a car or on a bike or crossing the street, because there are so many opportunities in a place like this to come into close contact with something that could harm you, and so few safeguards against those mistakes. And to give you the counterexample, here is a street also in New York City where you can make mistakes and you're not going to die, where you can make bad decisions, where you can come into harm's way and it's not going to end in a massive failure. And this last thing I'm going to show you is something we might want to reference as we talk. So this is a tool that's used for workplaces, not for road safety, unfortunately. But it's a way of thinking about how we can be effective when we make change to the street, how we can think about policy. We often spend a lot of time focused when we make policy on laws that the police can enforce to make the road safe, which is a way of saying, how do I stop this mistake? And I think a lot of the answers that we need to move towards to actually stop the rise in pedestrian fatalities involve changing our thinking so that we move towards how do I reduce the harm of these conditions? And so that's moving away from conversations about PPE, which is essentially like an individual behavioral decision. You know, should I wear my seatbelt? and more into the idea of eliminating hazards, substituting hazards, and using engineering to reduce the harm of hazards. And I know that was like a lot, but I want to just hop to the next person because I really think we're going to guess the best part of this conversation out with the discussion.
Thank you so much, Jessie. Super excited to take a deeper dive onto some of those points. Over to you, Lee Raz. So Dr. Lee Raz Friedman is a road safety supervisor at the City of Guelph, a longtime colleague and friend as well. So over to you, Lee Raz.
Thanks. I'm just going to take a second to share my screen. And while I'm doing that, I just wanted to say, Jessie, I appreciate both the topic of your book and the fact that we eliminate the word accident from all of the work we do in the City of Guelph, and also that pyramid that you shared at the end there, because we've implemented something similar as part of our Vision Zero action plan. So I appreciate everything you've done. I'm just going to take a second. Is this my notes slide? Can someone just let me know, or is it the main?
Yep, we're still on your notes.
Okay, one moment. Sorry.
No rush.
Never be simple. I got it to work before, and now I can't. Okay.
And while Lee Raz is figuring that out, anyone putting questions into the Q&A, we will try to be answering them as we go. And if not, we'll try to get to them in the open Q&A. Okay, you're good, Lee Raz. That looks good now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So before I begin, I wanted to extend my gratitude to the panel organizers for having me today. And like Jessie, I'm very excited to be part of this conversation and to hear about everyone else's backgrounds. I've broken up my journey in the road safety space really into 4 seasons of my life. The academic years, the professional years, the personal years, and what I call the giving back years, which I'm currently in. And I'll share those with you shortly, as they've shaped both my outlook on pedestrian and road safety in general. So in 2017, I graduated from York University with a PhD as an injury prevention epidemiologist. And I say I wear very many hats. That beautiful hat, unfortunately, was on loan, so I don't still own it. But my thesis really focused on how policies across Canada that were put into place to support injury prevention, so everything from helmet legislation to booster seat laws, impacted injury rates over time. And from there, I went on to do a postdoctoral fellowship, partially at the Alberta Children's Research Institute in Calgary. And there I looked at driver and road characteristics associated with child pedestrian injuries, which really is where I sparked my interest in both Vision Zero, as well as how the built environment could play a role in safety. The other half of my time was spent at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, looking at road safety policy. So that's when the City of Toronto reduced their posted speed limits from 40 kilometers to 30 kilometers, and the effect that that had on the number of pedestrian motor vehicle collisions over time. Now, not only did that study spark a ton of media interest, but it's still being cited to date really around the advocacy role with the conversation with automated speed enforcement in Ontario, if you're sort of following that profile. So I loved research, and I still do, and I've been fortunate in my professional years as a road safety policymaker to have had so many connections to individuals working in that academic sphere across the country, and also to get to collaborate with other wonderful partners such as Parachute on national research projects. However, I began to develop an interest in policymaking and how that research could be used in practice to make on-the-ground changes. So that's where we get from pavement to policy. This led me to a bit of a career change in policy as the supervisor of the road safety program within transportation engineering at the City of Guelph, which is where I currently work. And my biggest sort of projects to date that relate to pedestrian safety are in the areas of adopting the area-wide 40-kilometer speed limit zones in Guelph, the adoption of Vision Zero, and the subsequent implementation of the action plan. Our focus on the data-driven decision-making process, as well as investing in automated enforcement programs like red light cameras and speed cameras, and ultimately working with the community through collaborative events, such as the workshop that we hosted in collaboration with Parachute to focus our efforts on equity and safe mobility. This brings me to the personal years. So really, why do I care so much about road safety and pedestrian safety in general? Truth be told, I cared a lot even before I became a parent, but now I see firsthand that children should have the option to live in a society where multimodal ways of getting around are the norm without being concerned for their safety. And as you can see on this slide, my children get around in many different ways. Sometimes that's the two of them together on a little car. We like to bike as a family. Sometimes they're walking, albeit this one is into the ocean and too far into the water. But I want them to maintain that carefree nature because we've made our roads safer over time. We know that Sweden's done it, so why can't we? And finally, I wanted to share my views on the importance of giving back. Volunteering and being able to make a change from a leadership position is one of my biggest values. In the past few years, I have sat on many road safety committees and boards, from the Parachute Expert Advisory Committee to the Vision Zero and Safe Systems Subcommittee of TAC. Recently, I was also elected the president of the Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals, which is a wonderful organization committed to sharing knowledge on road safety from a multidisciplinary perspective. I also founded the Lead Hers in Road Safety, a group committed to making women's voices more prominent and visible in the road safety sphere. And that brings me to where I am today and what I am most passionate about. If I had to distill these passions into 5 broad categories, they would include Vision Zero, because no loss of life is acceptable on our roads. And sadly, we just heard this morning that we had a fatality of a 38-year-old woman in Guelph on Friday as a pedestrian. She was a mother of 2 young daughters and pushed a stroller out of the way. And so this is a reality we face every day. Data, because we know that decisions should be evidence-based. Equity, because safety must be inclusive and accessible for all. Community, because change happens when people are engaged. Speed management, because speed is a leading factor in injury severity that we see on our roads on the day-to-day. And these are the values that drive me, and I'm excited to share that with you in today's discussion, from pavement to policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liraz. Over to Gregory Franchisi, and I'm sorry if I'm not getting your last name correct, transportation planner at the City of Hoboken.
No worries. Share this.
How do you pronounce it, Gregory?
Francis.
Francis,
It's okay,
okay.
I'm used to it.
Okay,
All
and
right.
there you are. You're in the right mode. Over to you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Laraz, and thank you, Jesse. I am going to discuss my experience. I'm the transportation planner for the City of Hoboken. So Hoboken is a very densely populated city in northeastern New Jersey, right across the Hudson River from Manhattan. We are 1.2 square mile city with 60,000 residents. So we're the 4th most densely populated city in the United States. We have a high amount of transit users, and it's a very walkable, bikeable community. So we have a particular focus on vulnerable road users, particularly pedestrians, and ensuring that mobility isn't unsafe or unrestricted. So we launched our Vision Zero program in 2019, and we've had zero traffic deaths since January of 2017. How we got here over the past 15 years by adopting several policies, and we adopted a complete streets policy in 2010, and a lot of our citywide planning documents mention pedestrian safety, Vision Zero, complete streets, including our bicycle and master plan, which was created in 2010. We adopted the NACDO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, their urban street design guide, in 2010 as well. And then we launched a traffic calming toolkit in 2010. And we updated our master plan in 2018 to include Vision Zero again. And then we created our own street design guide in 2019 with the help from our metropolitan planning organization, because we felt that there weren't resources out there that would be helpful and specific enough to our context, which led us into creating our own Vision Zero action plan in 2021. So over the past 15 years, in addition to those policies and those plans, we've also built a pretty significant network of complete streets and Vision Zero related infrastructure. We built in our 1.2 square mile city, we built over 150 curb extensions. We've painted over 80 curb extensions, and 40% of our streets have some kind of bike lane. Most of them are unprotected. And then we've built pedestrian crossing islands at 14 intersections. And we built race crosswalks and race intersections at 11 intersections. And then in 2022, per recommendation of our Vision Zero action planning and a lot of the research out there that showed, the relationship between speed and crash severity, we adopted a 20-mile-per-hour citywide speed limit. Our previous speed limit was 25 miles per hour citywide. There were some streets that had a 35-mile-per-hour speed limit. And then we have a significant amount of intersections where in the state of New Jersey, you're not allowed to park within 25 feet of a crosswalk. And we've been trying to enforce that law with physical infrastructure and in our initiative called Daylighting. And we've daylit 2/3 of all of our intersections since 2021. And kind of summarizing all of that, how do we build it all at scale? A city of our size, geographically very small, but very dense. A lot of different stakeholders are important roadway users. So we've really leveraged political support. Our current mayor, Mayor Ravi Bala, has been a big supporter of Vision Zero, signed our executive order in 2019. We've also leveraged any kind of roadway project that touches the public right of way, whether it's a utility project or a corridor redesign. And then we also have park capital projects where we've made sure that not only are we building inside the park, but we're also improving the intersections and roadways around the parks. And then we've also leveraged state and federal grant programs. And then our community development department works very closely with our department and redevelopers to ensure that all these redevelopment plans that we're working on include some kind of Vision Zero component as well when they're making improvements to the public right of way. And then, of course, the biggest thing we've done is implement pilot projects and quick builds throughout the city, which has helped build support community wide for Vision Zero. So that's it. I'll pass it on to back to Valerie.
Thanks, Gregory. And we've been following Hoboken for some time. A lot of press, a lot of great press, and we can talk about that today. But in our world of road safety and Vision Zero, it's so good to see positive press, and I wish we would see more of it. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion around language and around how we can better leverage the good stories that are coming out of Vision Zero, because right now, especially in Canada, we're seeing a lot of negative press. So excited to talk more. Over to Cassie Smith, Strategic Lead, Transportation at the Enviro Center. And you're good with your slides, Cassie. Except I don't know if you're talking yet, Cassie, but we can't hear you.
Sorry, thank you.
No. Over to you.
There's always some sort of technology issue. As the other panelists have said, thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to have this discussion. I'm really thrilled to be with all of you today. And hopefully this goes ahead. All right. I expect that I come to this work from a different place than many of you here today. My interests and experiences related to transportation and safe streets really began when I became a parent, which is actually 8 years ago today. I hadn't really thought much about transportation before that. I just got around by driving, biking, busing, whatever I needed. And I didn't have the kind of time crunch that came with being a new parent. As well as having a new generation front and center in my life. I just felt this greater urgency for climate action at the same time that I was experiencing more challenges in transportation. And I knew that I wasn't alone. I had many conversations with other people, whether they were at that stage of life or remembered it from previous years. And that led me to complete a master's degree in geography, including a thesis looking at what it will take to make sustainable transportation easier for people in their everyday lives. Following my graduate work, I began to apply my findings in 2 ways. First, in my work at Enviro Center, and second, in my volunteer advocacy, both of which I will introduce you to now. I want to start by telling you a bit about Enviro Center. So we are a nonprofit organization that works in Ottawa and across Eastern Ontario in Canada. We have been around since 1999 and are a team of over 65 staff. We specialize in practical solutions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. To do this, we work in 4 key areas: home energy, waste and circular economy, green infrastructure, which is planting trees and stormwater management, and what I will talk about today, sustainable transportation. We design and deliver a number of services in this area with an overall focus on mode shift. We work with businesses, organizations, municipalities, and residents to support more trips by transit, walking, and biking. We know that mode shift is not simply a climate solution, it is also a solution for affordability, equity, physical and mental health, and most relevant for today, safety. Fewer cars on the road, especially on a sustained basis, will mean fewer risks, fewer crashes, and fewer serious injuries and fatalities. It allows for more space to be dedicated for other modes of transportation, like the separation of people driving, walking, and biking here. And it also allows for denser development so that the grocery store or pharmacy that you need to get to is closer, which can reduce the number and length of car trips. And it means that more people are out there, biking, walking, and using transit, which provides safety in numbers. But at the same time, more and more people walking and biking can lead to some other safety challenges, especially when there is not enough space for all modes. Our approach at Empower Center is grounded in positive psychology. So we focus on the opportunity, the trips that you can do by active modes, rather than those that you can't. Our images and messaging and stories are happy, positive, and we bring that framing to our discussions about safety, which is always focused on encouragement first and foremost. We focus on people, talking to people, understanding and learning from their experiences, and building that into our work and our future plans. And we focus on what's practical and achievable. We provide advice and training that makes sense for where our audience is at. We are not going to recommend that people, especially new cyclists or children, bike on a dangerous road. So thinking about the potential conflicts that we might see as more people are biking and walking, instead we equip them with information. We show them how to plan a safer bike route. We inform them about walking your bike, or for those who cannot walk their bike, how to make sure that they're traveling at the speed of and deferring to people who are walking, and just generally being good neighbors and working together on our streets and our spaces. We recognize that the way people get around is not necessarily a behavior change issue. Many people want to walk or bus. They want more options for their transportation, but often they need systems change to be able to do so. And in our messaging and our programming, we are always clear about the multiple benefits, the multi-solving potential of sustainable transportation. We talk about emissions, but it's really about so much more. I'm going to give a few quick examples of the kind of work that we do. So this is me leading a bike ride earlier this year. And it was kind of an opportunity to provide some on-site training in real situations. So we were showing people how to use different infrastructure, protected intersections, multi-use paths, cycle tracks, and also talking about how to plan a route when it might seem disconnected. One of our strengths is in bringing the right people together to move projects forward. And one way that we do that is through an annual symposium. The 2025 symposium we held earlier this year, we brought on Zivarts, the author of When Driving is Not an Option, a really fantastic book about non-drivers, just to reframe the conversation, the discussion about transportation. And we had more than 100 community members, including municipal leaders, transportation professionals, researchers, and advocates in the room to talk about how to increase transit use in our city. And this might be what you think of when you think of Canada. And that's often the kind of challenge that we work with. Some skeptics will talk about, the 6 or 9 months of snow that we have, which is really not the case. And we also emphasize that it's possible to use active transportation year-round. And we deliver a number of programming opportunities for the City of Ottawa, including a sustainable commuting program and school active transportation program. and we address year-round transportation head-on with resources and encouragement. And outside of EnviroCenter, I'm very active in my local community. I'm the vice president of Bike Ottawa, our local cycling organization. And I began a group ride here, part of an international movement of critical mass bike rides focused on childhood mobility and safe streets. And a parallel and kind of related movement around bike buses and walking school buses to give voice and visual representation to children, families, and their safety concerns. So one of the highlights of my week is Friday mornings when I lead a bike bus to my children's school. And while both of those activities are bike rides, it's really, we talk about all forms of transportation and safe multimodal options for children. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. And at this point, I would like to invite everyone, all our panelists, and Elizabeth, to please turn on your cameras and audio. And I'm going to start with a question for each of you. First of all, I just want to say, listening to everyone speaking is so fantastic because we were deliberate in our bringing together of all of you. And I think you all represent so many different points of entry for this discussion, you know, from being parents to advocates on the ground level, like what you're doing, Cassie, to Jesse's work as an author, and also with Transportation Alternatives, which is an amazing organization for Canadians who aren't aware. And then we've got our municipal folks as well, who I know also wear many different hats. But yeah, really excited about the conversation. So I can see Cassie right now, and I'm guessing everyone else is on screen as well. Jesse, I want to start with you. So I know for me, the use of the language around the word accident is often my jumping off point for discussions with friends, family, and colleagues who don't know about injury prevention. They ask me what I do. You know, they look at me with a confused face when I mention injury prevention, and I often go right to the word accident, because that word really allows people to kind of process. I see that aha moment with people where they're like, "Oh yeah, that you know what I described as a drinking and driving accident wasn't really an accident. It was predictable. It was preventable." So all that being said, you've written extensively about the systemic causes of traffic violence. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can shift the narrative from the word accidents to talking about preventable outcomes instead. And in that question, how do we change? This is so important in Canada right now around automated speed enforcement as well. How do we change the public perception and policy action on pedestrian safety? So a big question, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I might ask you to give me the second half of that again if I don't get to it. But
yeah, no worries.
I think this is really tricky because accident is like an intentionally magic word in the English language. Like it serves like a specific function, the way we're talking here, a car crash being a car accident. But it also is a word that we use to comfort each other. Like I am potty training my daughter, and I use the word accident with her all the time because my priority is making sure she feels okay about whatever is happening in that learning process, right? It's something we say to loved ones. You know, someone says, "Oh, I screwed up," and you say, "Oh, it's okay, it was an accident," you know? And those I actually think are okay. And where it gets tricky is when it's applied to our systems at large. We become, you know, we're made to feel better, right? It makes us feel better about all these things that are deeply, deeply preventable. And so something that I lean on a lot, and I think it's important, and I know about this like as a journalist and a storyteller, is that we thrive on conflict and tension and the way that that builds into narratives. And so the most effective thing we can do, I think, both to shift public policy and especially the public narrative, is to look at the ways that it is clearly not an accident. You know, we were talking about snow in Canada, and I was thinking of Iceland, which has, and Norway, which have these massively long winters, and they have more cyclists and more pedestrians in their cities than far warmer places and far lower rates of traffic fatalities. But there are a million examples of that. All of Europe versus all of the US, the rate of people being killed while walking is far, far lower. And you know, if we are insistent that these are accidents, then that means that Europeans are less accident prone, and people in the US and Canada are like extra clumsy. And when you bring people to that, you can really cite out the absurdity, and you can keep breaking that down, because in the US, for example, and I know this is true in Canada, but I don't know the numbers as well, we see large disparities in who is killed in traffic crashes based on race and poverty level. And so, you know, you by using the data and the specific narratives, you can really help people reach the idea that these aren't accidents. And then it leaves them with a question of why not us? It leaves them with that conflict, that competition. You know, if you are a legislator in a low-income community, or a reporter focusing on racial disparities, you know, I've like placed a lot of stories with these people and convinced a lot of politicians based on the fact that they're like, wait, why not us? Wait, we're dying more? I don't even know how to talk about traffic crashes because that's not part of the conversation about environmental racism. It's not part of the conversation about disparities. And I think one thing that is also helpful that you can get to with these groups is it begs the question, why? Like, why do we call these accidents? And there is a deep history there of car companies and urban planners creating conditions that put people at risk, whether it's for profit or, you know, there's a deep history of racism in urban planning processes that led to these things.
Absolutely.
And having that enemy, especially for rallying people to convince politicians, is a really effective tool to moving them away from the behavior narrative, away from the accident narrative, and towards the narrative of systemic prevention.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you did answer my question to some extent. I'm just going to take a little bit of a deeper dive there. So anyone who reads your book or works with you through transportation alternatives, policymakers, folks, they're going to get this, or they're going to start to get it. Very short, in a short answer to a very big question, public perception, public buy-in, like with so many shifts in what we're seeing politically happening all across North America. We're up against a lot, clearly, in both of our countries. If we were to focus in specifically on trying to change, to move the needle around how we think about accidents and connect it to pedestrian safety, road safety, on that larger scale, how do we go about it? How do we engage media, for example? How do we have bigger, more amplified conversations?
It's funny, I did a panel for SAVIR earlier this year that exactly got into this, like, how do you convince the politicians? How do you convince the media? And these actors do have different motivators, but to try and give you that short answer you requested, focusing on the victims, because I think there is not a badness to getting hit by a car, the way there is like stigma around drinking or drug use. And so you have a huge pool, I mean, of people, millions of people who are affected, who are hit, who are surviving with injuries, who lost family members. Helping those people be able to advocate, be able to talk to politicians, be able to talk to the media, giving them media trainings, giving them a route into a politician's office is the single most effective tool you have, because you can demonstrate how universal this problem is and how those people have real power to shift the perspective, because they're not advocates like me from the get-go.
Yeah.
They're your neighbors.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And we may have to have you back to do a panel just on this topic. So thanks, I appreciate it. Liraz, I'm going to swing over to you. So moving to a different area of the discussion around municipalities. At Parachute, we're often talking to folks at the policy level in different cities. We bring together engineers and public health and advocates to talk about a potential Vision Zero plan in their city. What we often hear is that there is a real conflict between trying to balance vehicle traffic flow with pedestrian safety. And we've got policymakers saying, well, I'm being pressured to ensure that cars are moving from A to B, and fleet vehicles, for example, to across the city. Especially, in Ontario, we've got this build better home, we've got a lot of policy happening around building more. And so we're hearing more and more about the need to prioritize those positions over pedestrian and road safety. Liraz, tell us a little bit about any strategies that you may have used in Guelph in shifting some of those design priorities in your city.
Sure. Thanks, Val. And I'll go back to kind of this conversation around language, because I think framing is a big part of it, and showing people that most of us are pedestrians every day, but most of us are not drivers every day. So we fit more than one role within a day, but it's not often in a vehicle. And so reframing that conversation from that municipal or policy lens often happens. But I do think we're recognizing more and more the benefits of foot traffic. So while we hear all the time, yes, there's this war on the car, we also hear that walking's a really important mode choice to help enhance things like mental health, to fight climate change, to foster a better physical self. And honestly, it's just enjoyable when it's safe. So I think a lot of the time, taking it out of that politically sensitive context and making it part of a broader conversation is very helpful. And I think this balance of mode shift is where we need to start. So an example from the city of Guelph, our transportation master plan has some pretty aggressive mode share targets that they're working towards. So they aim to have a 42% non-auto mode share target by 2051. And if we're really going to commit to something like that, then the strategies that we put in have to also help foster those master plans and some of the values that we've stood for. And I think some of the strategies that we can use to start shifting things is to bring to the limelight what I like to call sort of the flavor of the week. So you've already identified one, Val, and that's the housing crisis. How can we integrate road safety when it's not the top priority for people, or pedestrian safety, into a topic like the housing crisis, and making areas more affordable and more safe at the same time? Things like climate change, and then having those action plans and strategies that help to support that work too. So our Vision Zero action plan in Guelph is one of them. And then our other one that recently came out is the Complete Street Design Guideline. And even in that framing, it's interesting to me because really a street isn't complete until it's safe for all road users. So I think framing plans and strategies in ways that use language to help support pedestrian safety shifts the conversation from vehicles only to all road users.
Thank you. That's a great answer. And I remember, around the language piece as well and community buy-in, when Parachute did the workshop with Guelph, we did get a lot of great CBC media coverage. And I remember you saying it was right around the time when you were getting some backlash around the automated speed enforcement and the speed cameras. So I won't ask you to speak on that specifically right now, but again, just a really great example of language and how we use the media to kind of challenge some of the negative discourse we're getting around some of the work we're doing. Thank you. Gregory, I had a different question for you, but now since we're on this discussion of communication and language, we know Hoboken has done an amazing job. I spoke earlier, you've gotten some really great storytelling coming out of the work you've done. And I'd love if you can share a little bit about any potential kind of cross-department or community support you were able to get in your community, prior or as you were moving along some of your interventions that maybe not everyone in your communities or in your departments at the city level agreed with. So how did you guys at Hoboken kind of engage and bring together people to support the work you were doing to get to zero where you are today?
Yeah, so we in 2019, our mayor signed an executive order which created our Vision Zero initiative. As part of that, it identified a task force, which the membership, is pretty interdisciplinary. We have We have our Board of Education, we have our police department, we have our fire department. We have the county, which, 25% of our roadway network and most of our high crash network is under the jurisdiction of Hudson County. So, we had these stakeholders that, were previously working independently towards maybe different issues, not really, working together towards a common goal. Um, Finally being united under the Vision Zero initiative and our task force, and having the leadership backing and having council members on the task force and the fire department, the police department, public safety stakeholders, education, is really important because, we have a very small staff here and we can't do everything on our own. We also have many opportunities with, we have a lot of sections of our city that are designated redevelopment areas. So those are prime opportunities to build new housing, commercial, mixed use construction, and also get basically street redesigns and Vision Zero safety improvements as part of that. So I'd say our task force has been really helpful, and having the leadership of our mayor has been really helpful to bring people to this conversation about how we can prioritize pedestrian, bicycle, and other vulnerable road user safety.
Thank you. And yeah, that brings up a really important point about the political will. And I know in Guelph and obviously in Hoboken and many other cities that have done amazing work around Vision Zero, having that political will is so important to the process. You need that. You need more than just someone who's going to try to push it through. You need someone with a loud voice and who's really passionate and willing to take some of the chances that folks take to bring Vision Zero and strong road safety plans to their communities. Thank you. So, and also actually what's really interesting, something you mentioned, and again, it would be great to just have a webinar on this topic, as we're seeing infrastructure become a big topic in Canada with our federal government, and Lee Raz spoke to it as well, the housing crisis here. We are going to start to see a lot of new development and new communities popping up. And I think it's going to be so important for us on the ground to talk about road redesign or new road design in those communities. How can we do a better job now that we know so much more? So just another food for thought for another webinar. Cassie, over to you. So a lot of our conversation so far has been around policy and around the built environment to some extent, and some of the effective interventions that we've been working on in some communities. I hear, not, I don't hear it that often, but I do hear from people working in the road safety space that maybe we're focusing too much on the engineering piece, too much on the enforcement piece. Because we've heard some discourse around the education piece being lost to some extent, the individual behavior change kind of being left pushed to the side of the desk. And we know with Vision Zero, for example, education is important. And pedestrians and cyclists, while we never want to victim blame, they also play a role in our road system. So knowing some of the community work you are doing, tell us a little bit about the human behavior component of this work, and where you think we need to be addressing human behavior within this bigger picture.
In the work that we do, we follow actually the 7 E's framework. So that's through Green Communities Canada, but I think other organizations also look to a more expanded set of E's. So those include enforcement and engineering and education, but also evaluation and encouragement. And then they've added on these kind of lenses of equity and engagement. And I think it's really crucial that all of these elements need to work hand in hand, because if you're just enforcing or just engineering and not considering the impact that has on all of these other factors, then it really limits the reach and the opportunity that the work that you're doing has. So one of the ways that we do that in our work is to really bring the human perspective into how infrastructure is actually being used. So we go out and we do observations and we watch and we talk to people at a site where there has been an infrastructure improvement. And we also understand, because we're people that are walking and biking all the time, we know when we get there, oh, this is probably what is happening. This is why people are doing this. It's raining or it's freezing cold and people are waiting 3 minutes for the light to turn.
Yeah.
That's probably because it's uncomfortable and it's creating a lot of just not a situation you want to be outside in. So they're going to take a risk because the system that's been designed in a way that is not very favorable to them. So, we look a lot at directness. We know that that's really important for people who are walking and biking. If they're having to do a long meandering detour or route, they might just choose to go directly through, even if it is an unsafe intersection or something like that. So sometimes these observations and our reporting back will recommend looking at light cycle timing or adding a mid-block crossing or other ways of supporting people who are using active modes. And I do think that sometimes there can be a bit of like, if you build it, they will come mentality to engineering, but it really is more nuanced. So we also help people make the connections between what a newly built piece of infrastructure can do, how it connects them into a broader, safer network, how it, connects them to a grocery store or a place that they might not have considered walking or biking to previously. And just because this new intersection or new multi-use path is there, it wouldn't necessarily be part of their routine. They're not thinking about it as a way of getting around. So we really do a lot of outreach on that as well.
And for something like your I think the bike bus, the bike bus, which we're seeing a lot of, and they're quite fantastic. Do groups do any? Do you have discussions with the children around bike safety and how they have to also be aware of the rules of the road as a cyclist? Are we still having those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. But with a focus on kind of what they're responsible for and limiting what we feel as parents they're not necessarily ready for. They shouldn't be responsible for being on the road with big trucks or fast moving traffic. So we actually use our bodies to provide protection where that protection is not available, so that the kids can focus on learning, like, I have to go straight so that the kid behind me doesn't hit me. And they can practice, lifting an arm off of their handlebars to give a signal, but not feel like that is necessarily something that they have to do if they're not ready for it yet, or they can just, kind of get comfortable and familiar with doing that in a safe environment.
I love how you framed that, because we shouldn't have to kind of armor our children to go out and ride their bike in their community, or to even cross the road. They should be aware, as you said, of what they can be responsible for, understanding some of those limitations. So yeah, I really liked how you framed it, and in your answer around ensuring we connect behavior to the built environment, I think is so important, because we need to understand human behavior in order for these interventions to work. And my colleague Elizabeth, who I'm going to be passing the next set of questions off to, that's her background as well. And so I hope she can shed a little light on some of those connections. So those are our first round of questions. And Elizabeth, I'll pass the mic over to you to work with our colleagues on the next set.
Great. Thanks, Valerie. I really appreciate it. I just want to point out there's some excellent comments in the chat. I hope that you've had an opportunity to read them surrounding all of the discussions that we've been having. So we'll certainly be getting to those in a bit. So I'm just going to circle back to the start with Jesse. So I wanted to follow up on a point that you made earlier about the stories of others and pedestrians that have experienced, injury being really a powerful tool for advocacy. And I was wondering if you could speak more about your experience where sort of advocates, policymakers, and researchers successfully have been able to use this tool to connect with the public and drive change.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I helped found an organization that started as part of Transportation Alternatives and is in the process of growing into a national organization called Families for Safe Streets. And this is a collective of people who've lost loved ones and people who have survived traffic crashes, who are educating each other, supporting each other through their grief and looking to change specific policies. And I think what's important to understand about what they're doing is both that they are focused on, and this is a little different maybe than what Mothers Against Drunk Driving was doing in the 1980s. They are focused on systemic causes. They are focused not on behavior, not on policing individuals, but on changing the systems that we approach. And I think this is interesting if you look at something that's really unpopular, like automated speed enforcement. You know, Families for Safe Streets, Transportation Alternatives was pushing for automated speed enforcement for 10, 15 years and got nothing done until we let the people affected lead the conversation. And that was really special because you mentioned researchers, right? You mentioned, advocates. The voice of a concerned person who hasn't been harmed, the advocate, and the voice of a researcher who has undeniable data about the effectiveness of these tools. No one cares about those voices without the heart, without the inherent love of a parent, of sadness of someone who's surviving with lifelong injury. And what's really special about that is all of a sudden that makes the research something people do want to listen to. And so it's like having that tool makes all the other tools work better. And we really do see that in these automated enforcement fights because it means that we can push forward policies that are inherently unpopular. And the most important thing to understand about politicians is that they're risk averse. Hoboken accepted. That they don't necessarily want to put themselves at risk, and automated enforcement is wildly unpopular. And so you need to give them so much confidence for them to put their necks out for a policy like that. And one interesting thing to think about when you do that, and New York City is, I think, really has a density that makes this a slightly easier example, but I think if you're trying to make change, you should be capitalizing on tragedy. I can understand that's not a nice thing to say, but it is also the single most effective tool to creating political will. Something we saw, we've been fighting for a bill that would add speed governors to the cars of recidivist automated enforcement ticket getters. So people who get a bunch of automated enforcement tickets essentially are required to have a speed governor on their car. And this is gorgeous because it's not punishment, it's prevention. Your car just can't go any faster. And there was a horrible crash as we were fighting for this bill. Someone who had 20 plus speed camera tickets in a year sped through a red light. They killed a mother and her two children. And it became the center of the conversation around changing this bill. And I think that's where you get into the real essence of this is this woman who had caused this crash, she was such an easy enemy. You know what I mean? She was an intentional recidivist driver. And because newspapers and politicians love conflict, they love to stand up and grandstand. It would have been so easy to just go and yell at this one person and say, this is a bad person, not this is a big problem. But when we have research-driven policy backed by family members pushing for those system-based changes, we can change the narrative away from that comforting bad guy, this one enemy, into things that will actually cement change into our laws and policies. And so it's not just storytelling. It's how we're using the stories to stand up for these big ideas that are more effective than the classic Mothers Against Drunk Driving, drunk drivers are bad. This is a bad people problem narrative.
Yeah, I think that really nicely reflects something that I think I've heard from all of our panelists today, which is it requires input from multiple partners, right? Or multiple of the E's, not just the 4, right? But we can bring in 7. It requires lots of input in order to get it done, and it's something that, like, science as a larger field is moving toward, right? More interdisciplinary work, sort of that approaches the problem more holistically, which I think is really fantastic. So we'll move on now to Laraz. So we're kind of talking a lot about, or I should say, one thing that I hope to talk a little bit more about today is community partners, right? And I think, how important, we've talked a little bit about how important political will has been in making real change, but I'm curious to know how important community champions and advocates have been in the work that you've been able to achieve in Guelph and road safety in that area.
Sure. And I think while we talk about community champions and talking about big voices, and I'm going to relate it back to the E's, which I personally don't use anymore. We work more towards the safe systems pyramid, but all of those E's are integrated. And one of those E's is equity. And I think the challenge sometimes with community advocates or people who have the loudest voices are those voices are maybe sometimes unidirectional, and they sometimes come from more affluent areas. And so I think that there's this very niche balance of thinking about who you hear from and who knows how to engage with policymakers in a way to get their voice heard, in a way to get those changes made, versus using data in a way that highlights real people. So it's not data as in, let's look at a collision history and here's like a point on a map. It's let's actually go back to the story of what that person looked like, what the societal benefit looked like. So politicians love to speak in numbers a lot of the time. And I know when we try to make investments around safety in the community, I'll use red light cameras as an example. We invested X number of dollars. It was about $4 million in our red light camera program, and we saw a $40 million return on investment when it came to a reduced number of angle-related collisions, which reduced our severe injuries. But it ties back to the person who died in this specific scenario was a person. They're not just like, Jane Smith, 32 years old. Like we try to really bring that community feel back. And so one of the things that we did, and Val and I alluded to a little bit, was something called a walk shop. So we started with data. We wanted to make it more equity driven. We looked at census data across Canada where we knew that there were equity deserving communities. We overlaid data on top of that to show where collisions were happening, specific to people on bikes and people who walk. And we also looked at all of the requests we got. And shockingly, not so shockingly, the requests we were getting were not from the areas that we were seeing collisions, but they were from the most affluent spaces. So we decided to actually zone in on an area where we weren't hearing from the community, but there was a demonstrated need based off of the data. And that's where we started this workshop. So we brought in politicians, we brought in advocates. Parachute was there to help facilitate and support a lot of these conversations. We had municipal folks from planning and engineering and development, you name it. And then we invited the community, and we had them, their initial reactions was sort of like, why are you asking us to come and talk about our community? And we're like, we don't see this. We have collision history, we have pedestrian volumes, we have all these kinds of sort of information like on our computers, but we don't know what it feels like on the day to day. And as we walked around the community, we saw problems where someone said, we aired our dirty laundry, which we did in a way. But in order to make change, you have to sometimes admit that you're not doing things in the best way, and that those community voices are your best storytellers. But from an equity lens, you have to make sure to do your homework so that you're reaching out to people who might otherwise not be reaching out for themselves, and help have that integrate into the policy making and the design changes that end up happening from those discussions.
Great, thanks, Loraz. And kind of keeping in that same sort of mode of thinking, Gregory, I'm curious how Hoboken built sort of that cross-departmental as well as community support for the ambitious safety goals that you guys have been able to achieve?
Yeah, I think the cross-departmental coordination has been there's two factors. One is it's been a requirement of the administration is to work together, strong leadership, from the top down at the executive order, but also it's just physical proximity. We have small staff, we all work in City Hall, we all um our community development department and our transportation department, I sit in the same room as them. So our engineering office is down the hall. It's a very collaborative environment. We all sit down and we review things as a group. So no one particular person is shouldering the burden of making sure that a lot of these safety things are included in projects, but it's kind of um, the one lead department will they'll take the lead, and then they'll pass down the plans to another department to review. And I think that that's worked really well. It doesn't work if there's distance, or if there's different priorities among the departments. And I think our residents, we have a very transient population. Hoboken is it's a relatively young city. A lot of people, it's, where they move to be close to, Manhattan. And when they start, getting ready to raise a family, they'll leave for the suburbs. So I think one thing that has been difficult is just, keeping this community support high, because, your constituents are changing all the time. And I think our city council members see that as well. They hear different issues. So it's just been really important for us to have this core group of professionals inside city government that's making sure that these different policies are being included in designs that we're reviewing.
Great, excellent. So I think we have time for just one more question for Cassie before or I guess my one more question for Cassie before we turn it over to the many questions that we've got waiting for you guys in the Q&A. And something we haven't really touched on specifically, I mean, pedestrians are certainly vulnerable, road users and populations in pedestrian safety, but there are subgroups kind of within that, right? We think of children as particularly vulnerable. There are other pedestrians that may fit into that category as well. And I'm curious to know what strategies have worked well for you for engaging those underrepresented and more vulnerable populations in pedestrian safety initiatives.
It's something that we're very thoughtful and intentional about in our program design. And one of our most recent strategies is actually to implement an equity lens toolkit. So at the beginning of each of our projects, we kind of outline and answer a number of questions and make sure that we're really consciously thinking about how we're doing this in all of the work that we're doing. But that really stems from the work that we've been doing for a long time and making sure that that is a part of it. So in our communications material and at our outreach booths, we're making sure that our materials are available in multiple languages. We think about what our audience needs to be able to understand the work that we're presenting them with. So when we're talking to students in their classroom or outside of their school, we're not using the same language and the same messages that we would be using for other groups. We also make sure that we're really representing diversity of the people in our community. So racial and cultural diversity, ability diversity, and our language really being inclusive. So talking about walking and wheeling to school and making sure that there are options for people. We know some students, it's just not possible for them to have active transportation, but how can they, or for school trips in particular, they might have a parent that has an early shift, or they have separated parents and live in two different communities. So giving them the option to do that active transportation at another point in their day, or even during the school day. Some of the programs that we run in schools have incorporated walking as the first part of their morning, so that every student makes sure that they get that before they start their learning. And really deep collaboration with community partners who are working in this space day in and day out. So working with community housing providers, newcomer organizations, and other groups that are already invested in these communities and how we can support them in the messaging and the programming and grant development, all sorts of things that they are doing that relate to our sustainable transportation work. We also create and share some resources. So we have a toolkit on our website for organizations and for advocates to strengthen the relationship between accessibility, inclusion, and the climate movement, which are really great resources as well.
Great, amazing. Thanks, Cassie. So I think now we'll turn it over to the questions that we have in the chat. Val, if you want to lead that effort.
Yeah, you know what? And I'm going to pass it back to Kristen. You go ahead, Kristen. I know you've been monitoring the Q&A, so please go ahead with some questions from the public.
Yeah, we've had a lot of questions coming in and comments, and I have them across both the Q&A box and across the chat. So thank you everyone for engaging, not just with the speakers, but with each other. I would like to go with one from, hold on, sorry, I skipped right through it. Talking about fear as a powerful motivator. This is from Zvi. I apologize if I mispronounce your name, but saying fear is such a powerful motivator, yet the goal of Vision Zero and safe systems policies is essential about enabling people to move about without fear. Can we advance such policies without appeals to danger or fear? What's the role of media in this? And I think it's been discussed across some of our panelists already about framing and reframing, but there is, you know, always this kind of underlying discussion around outcomes and some of the negative things that we see when we discuss public health issues, you know, such as morbidity and mortality. So I would love to just see what the panelists have to say about that. And I know, Jesse, you talked a little bit about that, and Loraz and Cassie and Gregory, you've brought it up with your discussions around building coalitions.
I can talk a little bit about it, which is like, I think I like, as an idea, I like love this, but I like live in the world of like efficacy. And like, I don't think we're going to change the human condition. Like, I don't think we're going to change the fact that people and politicians and the media is motivated by fear and conflict. And I really do think we should be using it. But that doesn't necessarily help build a coalition. And so I think like in terms of advocating for a new policy, in trying to change how politicians, how the media are talking about something, I would say use the hell out of fear, you know? But at the same time, I do think that you need to be working with communities to show them a better way. You know, and these are like the simple actions, whether it's like a car-free street day or a block party, or a renegade DIY daylighting and curb extension. Things where you can use simple materials and quick builds to quickly show people that there is another way, because car culture is so ingrained in so many communities that there isn't even a concept that a car-free street exists, that there's potential for that. I've been watching this with my kid block parties all summer, and it's like, oh, you can go play in the street. And she calls them play in the street party. She wants to go to the play in the street party, because it's, even for a 3-year-old, like mind-blowing that there's some time when you can use the street differently. And so I think it's really important to be providing those examples while you're talking about, you know, the fear, when there is the opportunity around that. Because then what you're doing is you're connecting the systemic problem to the systemic solution and getting it out of that individual, like crime sort of based fear and into the you could have something better space. I'm sure the others have a lot to say on this too.
Yeah, I think the you could have something better space is really it's where we like to be. And we our city is so dense, and there's such competition for curb space. And we have the state law that prohibits parking within 25 feet of an intersection. So that's where, and to improve and increase the utility of our public right of way, you know, what we do is we put bike racks, we put City Bike, our bike share program, docking stations, we add green infrastructure, which looks very nice and helps, you know, obviously with visibility when you're trying to cross the street, or when you're a driver and you're approaching the intersection. So we try and do all these different things to give people, and we will do a lot of pilots We'll do a lot of quick builds because it's very cheap and it's something that we can change very easily if something goes wrong or we get community feedback and we want to try something different. But I think that, showing people what's possible doesn't have to require, a significant amount of, financial effort for planning studies and all these material costs. I think you can do it pretty easily, and there's basic things that we can do, for instance, the bike parking that I mentioned. That space is already, it's you can't park there legally. Cars that do park there, they get ticketed or towed. And so instead of doing that and giving people tickets and towing them, we put bike parking, bike share, green infrastructure, public art. So we try and give people an alternative vision and let them experience it in different contexts.
Those are great answers. I'll just add a tiny bit to expand on. I think fear is really powerful in part because it's an emotion, and there are other emotions that we can draw upon as well. So showing that possibility and really like love and care. And I think that's part of the reason that I focus so much on children, is that it just gives people another window into what this space could be and why this is important. But I do see the benefit of fear, but I also always worry about what that means for encouraging people. So we tend to stay away from that as much as we can, just because we want to see more people giving active transportation a try and coming at it from other emotional perspectives.
And I can just add one last thing. I have seen a declining trend in fear being used in some ways when you look at the media and just like the public messaging around it. It used to be like, if you get into a collision, you're going to get thrown out and there's blood and there's gore and it's very graphic. And now it's sort of like alluding to that idea without ever showing it, as sort of internalizing that fear, but also really spreading that message of prevention. So I think there's a way to use fear that's less graphic, but stays with you in a way that we sort of all make the right choices and are, of course, supported by an environment that will help us mitigate any kind of severe outcome.
Thank you. Those are all amazing answers. And I want to circle back to something that Gregory brought up around quick builds. We had a question in the chat from Holly Billy around quick builds. So since you brought it up in your answer, I want to come back to that. She wants to know an example of some quick builds and what are the cost range for those. People are thinking about implementing them in their own community and what that range looks like.
Yeah, I'll give a couple examples. Our waterfront is used to be an industrial waterfront, and now it's primarily used for cycling, walking, and the lower part of the waterfront, which is about 5 blocks. We have a counter out there, and we see about almost 2 million people using that corridor annually. And so we have a high amount of pedestrian volumes and cyclists using that area. And so what we did was we flipped the parking lane and the driving lane. It was one lane with parking on the waterfront side and one lane with driving on the building side. We just flipped those lanes, and we added chicanes just by striping. When you approach the intersection, striping these triangles as you approach, and then installing flexible delineators. And then when you leave the intersection, it's the same thing, but shifting to the other side. So that cost, $1,000. It wasn't very expensive for these 4 blocks. And the goal was to get driver speeds down to 10 miles per hour. In case, our whole design standard is, we look at the safe system approach. We know that there could be a crash and that someone can get hit crossing the street. And so we're just trying to minimize the severity of that injury. And so that was only, that was about $1,000. And that has withstood, the past 5 years of use. And now that we have a contract to redesign that street and add race intersections, which is obviously much more expensive, and is actually hard infrastructure. And then further up on that street, for the past 10 years, we've had a 2-way bike lane just marked out with delineators and wheel stops. And now we have a $8 million project to redesign that street as well. So starting, with these lower cost infrastructure, quick build, and then when we find funding and when we go out and get these grants, we're able to have the community support. So, if the community wanted us to rip something out, we haven't heard it. So they're so used to it being there, and they understand the benefit of it. And so we go into it with a, much more support than we would if we were just, saying we're going to spend $8 million on the street and we're just going to do this. So those are two examples, and there's many all throughout Hoboken. If you just go on Google Street View and you scroll back in time and kind of see how intersections have changed and how some of our improvements have been, gone from striping to concrete to other types of infrastructure.
Great, thank you. I see a question both from in the chat box and also in the Q&A that I'm going to kind of merge together for our panel. It's around rural communities and tribal communities who are often in rural spaces. So Dagan and both again Holly Billy have asked, and Dagan had to leave early, but I know he's going to listen to the recording, and he's out on the Pacific Northwest. What are opportunities to also draw more rural communities with similar different safety systems into the conversation? Too often they're left out of conversations like these, but they also have interactions with coming into urban centers for jobs and work and the transport around that. And then, to kind of add on to that, tribal and First Nation communities also are often in these rural communities and have many of these issues. And so can we kind of discuss our rural communities, which I know both Canada and the US have? I don't know if any of our panel have any suggestions. I know many of you are more in urban settings.
I mean, I think this is like a really interesting problem because these are communities where the traditional fixes don't make sense, right? You're not going to build a public transportation system for very few people. The roads are for cars so primarily, but that's where you see these low income Indigenous populations, but also Black and Latino populations who don't own cars. So something that's happening a lot in the US is the suburbanization of poverty. So the poorest people are being pushed out to the exurbs and the suburbs outside of cities with roads that are only built for cars, where hospitals are a long way away and they can't afford a car. And so they're relying on walking and biking and limited access buses. And we're seeing a lot of really preventable crashes around that. And I think, I don't think this is an answer, but I do think that there's a conversation to constantly be having with elected officials and with newsmakers about who lives in these communities. Because I think, especially in the US, we have these traditional ideas of rural and suburban communities as being kind of middle class and white, and certainly not Indigenous. And I think there is so much work to be done by simply taking those census numbers, looking at how many people in these communities don't own cars, how many of these households are not relying on cars, and what they actually have. And so, again, politicians are self-interested, media likes conflict. That's a conflict story. The system of the road is not meeting the people where they're at, and the politician wants to know who they represent, but I think they're often not armed with that data. So even just using the census to bring those people into conversation and help them get representation so that you can start to shift how those roads do look.
I'm not sure about in the US, but in Canada as well, the census data that we have around transportation is very focused on the commute to work. We don't have data about how people get around in these communities at all because they don't have the funding to collect data about mode share outside of the census typically. So they have this kind of understanding that a lot of travel happens by car, and a gap in terms of understanding just how much transportation, kids getting to school, people getting to their friend's house, seniors going to the coffee shop for a chat, is not happening in motor vehicles. And I think that that's limiting their kind of imagination about what their streets could look like. And that's something that I'm really interested in digging into a little bit further, but we haven't got too much work underway on that yet.
The other point I don't think we've even tapped into yet, which could be a whole other panel, and I wouldn't be the one to lead it because I'm not a planner, but we haven't talked much about land use planning and what that means for rural communities. And I'll give a shout out to the Transportation Association of Canada under the Vision Zero and Safe Systems Subcommittee created a Vision Zero primer that added a sixth part or a sixth pillar or wheel that looks at safe land use planning, because we talk a lot about retrofits and things we can do and traffic calming and changing things after the fact. But if we were more mindful and in thinking of being proactive and preventative in where we put things and how that might impact particular communities, then we wouldn't have to rely on all these quick fixes and going back and engaging, because we would do it from the forefront. So I think that's an important thing to think about. And I think the ultimate other piece that we haven't really got into is the idea of exposure. And when you shorten these trip lengths or make them more safe or more accessible for people, then you're also reducing people's exposure to that risk. So a lot of it is in thinking about how you plan communities before you have to go and retroactively address the concerns.
And we have a few moments left, so I'm going to ask a quick question and rapid fire it across the whole panel, if you don't mind, before we wrap up. All of you have talked about the need for advocacy and engaging communities, engaging lawmakers, engaging the media. And so I would love to hear each of your perspectives, and you've brought it up throughout your discussions, but just a quick takeaway point for everyone who's attended today on how to engage either with journalists or media or lawmakers that you have found best in your experiences or through your work. And I'll start off with Cassie, who I see in my top left.
I think getting people out and experiencing it is the most important way to do that. So we've had media, we've had city councilors, we've had community association presidents join us for these bike bus rides and critical mass rides. And it just gives them a deeper understanding of what we're kind of advocating for and what other possibilities are out there.
I was on mute. Sorry, I'll Gregory go next. Thank you, Kat.
One thing we struggle with is just speaking in terms that the non-technical person can understand. I am still learning how to do that myself. But in addition to actually going out and showing people, kind of what Cassie was saying, showing them, for instance, that we paint edge lines because we want to narrow the driving lane, and you can see this and you can experience this when you're driving. I think, we just have to work on our language and make sure that we're speaking in terms that anyone can understand, regardless of their background.
Yeah, that was a common question I saw around language. So thank you for bringing that up. And I'll bring Laraz in, please.
So I'll also speak to language, but in a different way. I think certain terms, and Jesse's of course highlighted accident as one of them, are ways that we're trying to get the media to change. But I think the other one is around the concept of safety versus kind of big brother. And I'm going to use that example in Ontario of automated speed enforcement. The term itself, automated speed enforcement, photo radar, it just feels very scary. There goes back to that conversation around fear and being watched and privacy and all that. And really all they are safety speed cameras. So I think that's one example of a place where you can use language to help reinforce the idea that this is about safety and reducing speed. And it's one way that you can leverage language so that the media really reframes that conversation in a more positive way.
Excellent. And Jesse, we'll end on you, our journalist.
I like that we all keep talking about traffic cameras because they're such a good example of something that is somewhat undesirable, and like a change we made when we brought them to New York City. And we now have the largest program in the world, was we stopped talking about enforcement and we called them speed safety cameras. And we ended up doing a campaign around school zones. So we said we need speed safety cameras at every school. And like, there's no way to be in opposition to that.
Mm-hmm.
And now we call them school zone cameras, school zone speed cameras. So it's a way that I think this is really important. Like, you should not, outside of folks like Gregory who are working in government, you should not be playing a clean game here. This is politics, and you should be using language that manipulates the public towards the positive benefits that you're going for here. Like, that's okay. You don't have to speak in officialdom. You can speak in words that do pull heartstrings and move things forward. And to that end, a lot of, and this is especially effective with the media, superlatives. When we were doing this campaign around trying to get speed governors, you know, we published a list of the license plates of the top 10 speeders in the city. And it wasn't their identifying information. We don't know it. We knew what their car was and their license plate number, but it was a huge hit. The map like traveled around the world of people who were interested in this because we created this narrative of, oh, wow, look at these people, these superlative people. But the answer, of course, wasn't throw them in jail. It was pass this bill that protects everyone. So I think that 1-2 punch of like playing with people's emotions to a degree to get these policies that, you know, do correct for the larger human condition.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone, and I want to thank our colleagues at Parachute. I know SAVIR has had a lot of fun planning this panel for the past few months, and it's a critical topic that I think we can be having real positive change directly in our communities. So I would really like to thank everyone for participating today, and I don't know, Val, if you have any final thoughts also.
Yeah, no, thank you. We want to thank all of our panelists for sharing your expertise. We could take each of you and one topic of what you talked about today and do a completely separate panel. There's so much rich content here. We also want to thank SAVIR. This was our first initiative together. We're looking forward to many more. And finally, on the Parachute side, we always want to come back to our sponsor because we cannot do this work without our sponsors. And Desjardins is one of our biggest sponsors in the road safety space. As a reminder, the session was recorded and we will be sharing the link following the event. There also will be a short survey sent out to you, an evaluation survey. Please just take 2 minutes to fill it out. They're very helpful to us. And we encourage you all to continue to have these conversations. Reach out directly to me or to Elizabeth and Kristen on the SAVIR side. And someone wrote in the text box, it's a street fight. Jesse we've heard that language before. Jesse mentioned it. And certainly I think in both Canada and USA, it is a fight right now to prioritize road safety. And so we do need to keep fighting and, you know, let's do it. Let's be vocal and let's continue to engage our policymakers as best as we can.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.